Welcome to the Zencast. My name is Dale Pickles. I am the host of the Zencast and one of the directors here at B Squared. If this is your first Zencast, then welcome. The aim of the podcast is really simple. We want to help as many people learn all about special educational needs and disability, and you get to do it along as I learn. In this episode, I'm discussing the zones of regulation with my guest, Kim Griffin. Kim is an occupational therapist and founder of Griffin OT. And Kim has been working in SEND for the last 20 years with a focus on autism, sensory processing, and dyspraxia. The Zencast is created and produced by us here at B Squared. I normally mention our assessment software products, but this time we're going to talk about Eversense, our evidence and parental communication system. Eversense feels like social media, so it's extremely easy to understand and use. It is also extremely secure. It's a safe place to share evidence of learning with parents or external professionals. It's also a great way to capture pupil voice or use as your homeschool diary or reading diary. Visit the B Squared website to find out more about Eversense or to click on the meeting link in the show notes. And you can book a meeting with me and I will show you what Eversense can do. Now, let's get on with the podcast. On this week's show, we're discussing the zones of regulation. What are they and how do they work? This week's guest is Kim Griffin. Kim has come back and she is an occupational therapist and founder of Griffin OT. She has been working in SEND for the last 20 years with a focus on autism, sensory processing and dyspraxia. And she provides additional training and support for sensory processing and motor skills like handwriting on her website, griffinot.com. Welcome back, Kim.
Hi, Dale.
Lots of schools use the zones of regulation. So as always, with any topic we discuss, let's start at the beginning. What is the zones of regulation?
Okay, so the zones of regulation is a program or a curriculum that was developed by an occupational therapist named, and I may pronounce her surname incorrectly, but it's Leah Cuprez. And she has a book which outlines the entire curriculum. And what I often find missing in schools is maybe the book or the curriculum, or it might not have been sort of looked up by the people that are implementing it. But there is a complete book outlining what the zones of regulation are. What I'll be going through with you today, I'll summarize some of the information from the first chapter. And I think it'll be good to talk about some of my own personal experiences using the zones and also what I see when I'm in different schools. But I will caveat that this is not my program. It's written by another therapist. There is a published book. There's a website on the zones if you need more information. And there are lots of different resources and trainings available on the zones. But I do think given the prevalence of zones in schools, it's a good topic to have on the podcast because it's definitely being used everywhere. So I think to take a step back before we look at the zones themselves, it's helpful to consider that the program was developed by an occupational therapist. And the first thing she was looking at was very much what's self-regulation. And the things that she was including in the development of the program was sensory processing and how that impacts self-regulation and arousal. We spoke quite in depth about arousal on a podcast that was out a couple of months ago. So if you don't know what arousal is, if you are totally not sure why we would be talking about arousal in the links to SEND and zones of regulation, I would recommend stop listening now and go and listen to the arousal podcast because that goes through kind of some of the foundations of why you are using the zones of regulation. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to support self-regulation, and that is trying to support levels of arousal or alertness in the body. So Leah was thinking very much around sort of how the senses impact on that. The program also draws from executive functioning theory and emotional regulation theory. And it pulls together concepts from an earlier occupational therapist program called the ALERT program, or you might have seen the book, it's called How Does Your Engine Run? And that was very much predicated on levels of arousal and thinking around the fact that your level of arousal or energy might be too low, it's in the just right zone, or it's too high. And they used the analogy of a car going at certain speeds, then you need to be at the right speed for the right task. If you're going too slowly, you're not going to get the task done, or you might not get there. If you're going too fast, it could all get out of control and there could be a problem. And the other thing that the zones draws very heavily from is the incredible 5-point scale. I think that's more known in schools. It was just literally a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1 being kind of calm and organized and 5 being out of control. And it is quite a nice book that can be used for anything. So it might be used for level of voice. It might be used for level of movement. It might be used for level of anger. You could really tailor it to be 5-point scale on sort of anything. So when she was developing zones of regulation, she's pulled from those resources and also some of the social thinking resources, which is resources by Michelle Winner. And so some of the concepts within zones, such as size of the problem and things like that, actually come from social thinking. So the zones themselves, and I'm going to read this bit from the introduction of the book because I think it helps to kind of phrase it correctly and also know where we're starting. The zones of regulation is a conceptual framework used to teach students self-regulation. Creating this type of system to categorize the complex feelings and states that students experience improves their ability to recognize and communicate how they are feeling in a safe, non-judgmental way. It also allows students to tap into strategies or tools that help them move between the zones. The zones of regulation categorize the states of alertness, so arousal, or emotions into 4 colored zones: blue, green, yellow, and red. And we can continue to talk about them a little bit more. But that's sort of the core piece of zones. Is it's a framework that's there to help, I suppose, capture both level of arousal and emotions. And in my experience, when I say in schools, that level of alertness or arousal piece is sometimes missed out, and we go straight to the emotions and kind of straight to having to be in the green zone. But I think it's useful to have that understanding that when it was developed, it was very much thinking around blue being low level of alertness and the emotions that might fall into that, red being very high level of alertness and the emotions that might fall into that, and green being kind of the just right state or the ready zone and the emotions that might fall with that, and then yellow being somewhere between green and red, sort of that increasing arousal but not really high level of alertness that you've sort of completely lost it.
So obviously it's rag rated, it's green, yellow, red.
Yes.
Really simple. Green is good, red is bad, yellow is going from green to red, but almost we've got a chance to turn it around. Is that kind of I know I was simplifying it very quickly.
It is, and it is in terms of that, and that's the thinking in terms of your level of alertness. It's there when you're in yellow, it's definitely easier to turn it around than if you're in red. I think I'll pull up just that piece of good. You said sort of green being good, and I really think the reason I read that paragraph at the start is because there's how they're feeling in a safe, non-judgmental way. And the ethos of zones is that no zone is good or bad. Every zone has a place. Like there are times when you are in the blue zone because you're exhausted or you're sick. There are times when you're in the yellow zone because you're frustrated about the situation, or you might be worried about an assignment or something that you've got due. And it's the original concept was very much normalizing those and then providing the support strategies to change the zone that you're in, but accepting that it's all okay. And sometimes, particularly for our kids with SEND, they're not necessarily great at naming the emotion, but using a color can be a very quick way for them to check in. I'm red. Is much easier than trying to figure out I'm overexcited or I'm incredibly angry. But I'm red is a very quick and easy way to communicate kind of level of alertness or arousal.
So I'm literally trying to get it out of the school context, but on the way to school, your bus doesn't arrive. Yeah, your bus is gone. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're waiting for the bus, you're in the green. Yeah.
Yes.
You've now realised that bus ain't coming.
Yes.
You're probably going to go straight into the yellow.
Yeah, but it depends on how late you are and how frequently your bus comes. Like if your bus only comes once an hour and you're already running late and the bus doesn't come.
I forget you're in London. They're every 2 minutes for you. Yeah. So it's not really a big thing. But out here, we're what I call book bookstop. Yeah. If you're going to go get a bus, take a book with you.
Yeah.
That's where we are. But it's that sort of thing. So if you literally, by that bus not turning up, you're now going to be half an hour or an hour late for school.
Yeah.
You're probably quite quickly going to go from green to yellow.
Yeah.
Unless you already know, actually, they're quite good with this. But generally, it's quite easy to go to yellow.
Yes.
And that's the bit where you go, okay, what am I going to do? And if you haven't got many options,
you're going to go into red quite quickly. Yeah. And, maybe when I used to when I worked in clinic, if I didn't get there, no one opened the door. So me being late was a big problem. And it would be the same for, say you're the person with the key at school, or say you actually have to be there to teach the class. Yeah, the size of the problem dictates how quickly it should dictate, not for everyone, but the size of the problem, and that's very much coming from more of the social thinking literature. The size of the problem should dictate the level of reaction that you have.
Now, in your context where you're late and you don't open up, you can kind of very, very much, you may have done something wrong because you're late. But it's like if you're relying on public transport or there's a crash or something, then in reality, you can do nothing wrong, but still end up in yellow or red.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's not you've done something wrong to get into the red. It's often, as we talked before, that external
there's
stimulus.
External things. I mean, you might see a spider that could, for me, I don't really have an issue with spiders unless it's one that I know is quite poisonous. But either way, I will, I'll sort it out. Other people would be like straight into what they would call red zone, like completely lose it and have to run out of the room screaming because they just don't do spiders and their level of alertness goes up.
But if there is a threat and you go into the yellow zone, that's the right response.
Yeah, completely. Like, if you really struggle with math and you get frustrated every time the teacher says it's math lesson, or if you're really struggling with writing and, you have a behavioral issue just before big write, it's an expected response to the situation because it's something you find difficult or you might be worried about or you find threatening.
That's the thing. It isn't I think green is good and red is bad because that's if you see traffic lights.
Yes.
Then, especially like in terms of progress, green is what you're aiming for. Green is, and it can be quite easy to untake that application that green is good, red is bad, and orange is we need to get to green.
Yes.
As that's how the zones of regulation work.
Yeah, and I definitely see that. I see children's perceptions being like that in schools a lot of the time. They just want to be green. And I've seen kids, they're like, no, I'm in the green zone. I'm fine. I'm in the green zone. And like, you're looking at them and going like, you are not in the green zone, but I know you want to be in the green zone because you have been taught or your perception is that green is good and you know that you want to be a good child and you don't want to be in trouble. So
rather than green, the yellow, and the red being a judgment of them, is it not more a warning to those around them? i.e., I'm in the red zone and there's nothing I can do about it. I'm in the red zone. Back away.
Yeah, I mean,
to I'm in the green or I'm in the green zone.
Yeah.
Come with me with your problems. I can take it off. And yellow, okay, you might get it wrong. You might get it right. I don't know which way it's going to go. So it's not how you are feeling because yellow is a good response, but it's sometimes going, if someone's in the yellow, just slightly more caution.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for both. It's a way. The zones, essentially, if you work through the curriculum, so in the book there is a lesson by lesson curriculum, which I think is too higher level for, say, Key Stage 1. Some of the content in there is too challenging for, say, Key Stage 1. And it's certainly, I have always had to rewrite it for kids with SEND and particularly nonverbal or pre-verbal children in the earlier years. Like you can use it with them, but I've never found that the curriculum is written at the level that they can access. So it does need to be differentiated. But I've never really seen, I see in schools an awful lot of posters of Zones Up, and there's some wonderful posters of Zones Up, but I've never really seen a lot of teaching around what green means, what green looks like in your body. The kids can recite off the emotions, like, angry is red and it's bad, calm is green and it's good, but they can't necessarily say, when I am angry, my heart is racing and I've clenched my fists and I frown on my face and like I want to run away. Like they're not necessarily learning those elements of it. So there's a piece around it's a communication tool for the children, but it's also a way for adults to kind of communicate into the kids as well. I can see you look like you're in the yellow zone at the moment. How about you go to the movement zone, or how about you go and have a drink of water to help yourself calm down? So it works both ways. And I think it is most effective personally when adults are also using it to describe how they are feeling. So you can reflect your own state of emotions, linking it to the zones as a way to help children to understand as well.
What's interesting is I don't think I've anyone really talk about the blue zone, because
Yeah.
generally that's not a problem.
Well, I mean, but I suppose zones would put blue zone, the emotions that fall into the blue zone would be things like being sad, being tired, being sick. So it,
So it's not, we talked about on the arousal one, kind of having
Yeah.
low arousal. So
Yes.
the blue zone isn't that.
well, it is low arousal, like it is classified as low arousal in zones, but the zones also tags in. Have you seen so it's a color, but there's emotions linked to the color.
Right.
And one thing I personally find, and one of the reasons I don't use it so much anymore, is because it groups all of the emotions together in that color. So it groups comfortable and uncomfortable feelings together. So excited and frustrated are both in yellow. And I find some children, there's a real disconnect for them with that, because they're like, well, why are both of these emotions yellow when they feel quite different? So I personally tend to, and on my Feel It Change It bar, I tend to separate emotions out into, is it comfortable or uncomfortable? And, that way I can separate excited and frustrated into different spaces, because to me that makes more sense.
That's the thing is, I think going from green to yellow due to external positive stimulus like excitement is one thing.
Yes.
But going from green to yellow due to frustration is a different thing. And probably you will then have different strategies to get you back to green.
Yes. And that's why I personally prefer to separate them out and have a red 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and a yellow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and separate them out and let the children identify their arousal or their alertness state. And also the other challenge I sometimes have with zones is that not everyone feels emotions in exactly the same way. So some children might feel, when they're bored, they might actually feel slightly higher arousal because they don't know what to do. And some children, when they're bored, they might feel lower arousal because they're just like, I'm not stimulated. Some kids, when they're scared, and I found this when I was working more with adopted children and doing it, like who'd experienced sort of trauma and neglect, and I remember distinctly with a set of brothers I was working with, one put scared in high arousal and the other put scared in low arousal. And it made so much sense because the one that put his scared into low arousal would freeze. The minute there was a problem, he would freeze. And the other, whenever there was a problem, he would just, it would all come out, like he'd be shouting, he'd be screaming. So, and even though you could argue that the freeze is a complete overloaded state of arousal, for the child, they felt it as frozen, as no energy. So that's where sometimes zones can be a little bit too prescriptive for some kids because they don't necessarily feel those emotions exactly in the same way.
Yeah. So my nephew used to owns a regulation, and he had basically had 3 responses. So if he was green, he'd say green.
Yes.
If he was yellow, he would say, "How are you?" Go, "I don't know."
Yes.
And if he red, he wouldn't answer.
Yeah, and that's not, it's not uncommon, because it's not uncommon, particularly in autism, for that yellow, that middle zone, for kids to really struggle with it. Like they identify when they feel calm. They totally know when they've lost it, but they're not great necessarily at identifying that middle zone. And it's actually a really important zone for kids to learn how it feels and to learn what's going on when that's happening. Because as you said at the beginning, that's when it's easier to sort the problem out. That's when it's easier to calm down. That's when it's easier to make a more cortex cognitive choice that's not going to cause a big problem or not going to break something or ruin something later down the track or not say the things you didn't really mean to say. So it's really important to help kids to identify that sort of middle state.
So when we talked on low arousal, high arousal,
Mhm.
we could say that, if you're just really sleeping, dark room, low arousal,
Yes.
and then really noisy thing, lots of stuff going on, high arousal,
Mhm.
and it was I would say a pretty consistent low arousal to high arousal scale.
Mm.
With the zones of regulation, is it within the, because you mentioned the introduction within the social norm, so is it within the context of the activity you're in? So if you're sitting there quietly reading in a library, you're in the
Yes.
green zone.
Yes.
If you're in the middle of a rugby scrum, feeling the right things at that moment, are you still in the green zone or are you in the yellow
In the yellow
zone?
zone. I mean, this is the thing you would expect to have, and on zones, because it is very much at its core, it's, even if it's not taught that way, it is arousal, alertness led. You would expect to be a bit yellow zone at that point, because and this is what I'm very cautious when I'm working with kids, is teaching them that actually that's expected. Like, you're in that rugby scrum. That the thing you need to make sure though is that doesn't tip into
The red.
over arousal. So there's a wonderful clip from Nemo where it's just the first day of school clip. It's a really cute clip, and Nemo's jumping on his dad, and he's getting more excited and more excited and more excited, and then he bounces off and he ends up stuck in a piece of coral. And it's a really wonderful sort of way to show the kids, like, yeah, you can be excited, but if you get too excited, that's when something could go wrong. And you see that on the playground all the time. Like, kids might be play fighting or doing something, and they don't pick up on the cues that one or the other has had enough, and then someone gets hurt, or there's an argument or something, or someone pushes someone. But it's that piece of, yes, I'd expect a bit of arousal. And one of the schools I worked in, they used to call it the danger zone when you got to the top. So, like, yes, it being frustrated actually is normal. Being excited is normal, but we need to watch out for the danger zone. And at that point, we need to know how to stop ourselves and keep ourselves safe. And I think that's a nicer way to talk about it with children, in terms of actually we need to know how to keep ourselves safe.
So if you go back to football,
Yes.
not really that into football, but it's just nice analogies come from football to me. If you're a defender and you've got a
Yes.
striker ahead of you and you're chasing him down,
Yeah.
you're kind of in the yellow zone because it's kind of giving you that
Yeah, the
want to chase
adrenaline.
them down.
Yeah,
The adrenaline's
yeah.
kicking in. How you tackle them is going to be really indicative, because
Yes.
if you do a good tackle,
Yes.
you're in the yellow zone. Yeah,
Yeah.
you still got that control. If you just hack at them,
Yeah, you've got
you're
in the red zone.
either in the red already or you're about to go.
Yeah.
And it's sort of thing. It's that sort of thing, but you can't just get that through nothing.
No.
You kind of have to get it wrong a number of times and get it right a number of times to start going, this makes sense.
Yes.
I'm in that bit, and I do have an element of choice.
Yeah. And we spoke about it when we talked about arousal, and just there is that underpinning neurology of that. Because when you are excited, your heart starts pumping, your breathing starts going, you've got that cortisol, you've got all this stuff pumping through you, and you at some point you might not have the cognitive control to kind of pull it back, and there's a lot of learning around that. And like young kids get it wrong all the time, and that like you see it with mammals. Like, if you look at little like puppies, with their mum, they'll be play fighting, and they'll kind of bite, and then they'll bite too hard, and then their mum will kind of come back at them and say, no, that was too hard. Or like their siblings will be like, no, that's not okay, and it'll go from play to aggression. And that's them learning, oh, I've stepped over the mark here, I've stepped over the line here. And it is by those experiences that we learn, and we lay down different patterns, and then we've got the experience to make a different choice at a different time.
And I suppose staying in the green zone can be quite boring.
So
that's the thing, is although we talk about football and going to yellow zone, is if you are doing a Kahoot quiz,
yes,
you generally, if anyone who is competitive is in that yellow zone.
Yeah.
Anyone who really doesn't care could be in the green or the blue.
I'm usually.
But if you're competitive, you're in the yellow zone.
Yeah.
Especially if there's a chocolate on that desk.
Yeah.
You're really going for it. But you want to be a bit in.
Yes.
And you've got to be able to regulate
and come
yourself.
Back down.
So that's the thing. It's not just a bit doing. Is there activities you do in that class will get children into the yellow zone on purpose, almost? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
part of the activity.
Yeah. And I was talking to a teacher I used to work with years ago recently, and she was talking about a particular student, and she said, actually, for him to learn his math, I needed to get him a little bit higher arousal. Because if he was, if I was doing something challenging, I just needed him that little bit higher to pay attention to me and to really capture on to what I was saying. So, yeah, there's green is not good, and it's not always the state that you'd expect it to be in for the situation.
Green is probably a safe, normal level for my body to maintain.
Yes.
It's sort of, you can go yellow or red, you can go blue, but kind of the green is the best thing for your body, but it's not where you should always be. Because if you're literally watching videos of American soldiers surprising their kids coming from home, you're going to go straight into that blue zone.
Yeah.
And that's what's supposed to happen when you watch those videos. If you're watching Britain's Got Talent, and it's one of those really well scripted things which really pulls in your heartstrings. So he owed it to himself. He kept true to himself, and he really did all those things with all that montage. And they sing, and the golden buzzer is pushed. You're either going to be in the blue because you're really sad for the mum he lost, which he's doing it all for, or you could be in the yellow zone because you're really excited. And that's the thing, is one event could send one child to yellow, as you said earlier, and another child to do.
Yeah.
It depends what they're picking up on in that process.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, so the zones in itself is the framework plus the curriculum. And within the curriculum, I can't actually remember how many lesson plans there are, but it very much goes through teaching about arousal levels and alertness levels. It teaches the emotions that link to that. It teaches about triggers. So there's a whole section on teaching children about what might trigger them to go into the yellow and red zones, which is also important for them to know, because some of those triggers they might want to avoid. Like if they know that sitting next to Sam is going to make them fiddle about, then that's a trigger that puts them into the yellow/red zone and gets them in trouble in class. So they might want to not sit next to Sam. Like,
Yep.
it's that kind of piece. And then there's the strategies that you can use when you are in those zones, and it includes mostly sensory strategies, so different types of movement or breathing or fidget toys or visual displays or different things like that, or maybe eating something chewy or having a drink or coloring. Just there's different strategies in there as well that ideally the kids will create their own individualized plan of what helps them to regulate and calm down. Quite often when I say it's used, there's 2 or 3 kind of stock standard things, but ideally the kids will have their own individualized plans.
So I suppose the aim is helping them to be able to identify their own triggers,
Yes.
then trying to remove that trigger. So either by kind of reducing how much it's triggered them by helping them understand maybe why that's happening,
Hmm.
or kind of that sort of thing, or making it more acceptable, or trying to remove that trigger from happening. So maybe, as you said, move them to the other side of
Yeah.
the class, things like that. So one of them is doing the trigger. The other bit is working on how they respond. So you
Yeah.
can't just do one of them. It's got to be
No,
both.
no, it's going to be both. And there's also that piece of teaching the kids around, what's that like in my body? What's happening to my body? So what I see a lot in schools is that the emotions are very much focused on and the colors are very much focused on, and kids can tell you they might be angry, but they can't necessarily tell you how that's feeling in their body and also how that escalated in their body.
Yes.
And that's what I tend to come back and focus much more on, that the body sensations. And we were talking about this in the arousal podcast. Like, what are the body sensations that are going on to lead to that change in alertness and arousal? So if there's one thing I would say to schools that I see missing a lot and I'd love you to teach more of, is pulling it back into that level of alertness, linking that to the colors and kind of what's going on in the body. And you can turn that into a great PSHE lesson. So it's not just a
No.
like, it's not an extra ad that you've got to do. It fits quite nicely into the PSHE curriculum as well. And you can add it into your science of, like, wherever you're teaching like human body and anatomy, you can add it into that as well.
I think it is important it really is important to recognize those feelings, because that's the thing, is if you're in that I don't know zone,
Yes.
I don't know is you may not have realized until someone asked you. Until I said, how are you feeling? They go, well, actually, I've just noticed I don't have those triggers which tell me I'm green. Oh, what do I have? Unless someone asks you, you won't know. So you then got to be able to actually work out what those feelings are inside you.
Yes.
Maybe even what the triggers happen. But it's those recognizing those feelings inside you is, unless you recognize that feeling as you're going starting going to the yellow and then going deeper into the yellow, there's no chance of you turning it back.
Yeah. It's very hard to catch it. And it just, even as a personal example, I can't remember if I said this last time I was here, but I had my mum when I was home a couple of years ago. She was standing in front of me and she was as pale as a ghost. And I just said to her, Mum, are you okay? She looked like she was about to faint. Like, she was really pale. And she's like, yes, I'm fine. No, go and sit down. And I just said, have you had any water today? And she's like, oh, probably not a lot. And we'd just been out for lunch and we'd had a glass of wine. And I just think she was dehydrated and she was starting to get lightheaded, but she hadn't recognized in herself. And I could tell just by looking at her, because she was pale. And when she sat down, she was like, oh no, you're right. I'm not feeling great. But she completely ignored the changes that were clearly happening in her body to say, hey, you need some water, you need to sit down. And a lot of our kids necessarily great at recognizing those earlier signs, particularly the kids that you would say maybe go from 0 to 100.
Yeah.
They're potentially inhibiting those signs or not recognizing those signs. But they are happening underneath, even if they're not necessarily fully recognizing them.
They might have been at 50 for a while, just have absolutely no idea. So nothing really changed. It's only when it tipped over that it went straight to 100. And that's the thing, is it's always that unpicking.
Yes.
So, I mean, I suppose the main way people using it badly is going to be green, good, yellow, almost not so good, red, bad, and just simply using it that way. And that's completely not that.
Yeah, then that's not how it was designed to be used. It was designed to be that sort of safe space and way to communicate levels of alertness and an easy way to communicate. And I would say also that sometimes, particularly for our SEND kids, particularly if they're autistic or they've got developmental language disorder or any kind of communication difficulty, just getting a color in the moment is actually much easier for them than having to push the emotion. And you might be able to get the emotion later on, but if they're really dysregulated, just getting a color from them or talking to them using the language of color is a lot easier for them to process than kind of pushing it further and getting the emotion and telling them you feel sad because what they've done. That's not helping in the moment. And I know that it's a standard piece of practice, and I know it's commonly recommended, but if a child's really dysregulated, they don't have the capacity to process how you feel, and telling them that you feel sad is also not going to it's not going to help their self-esteem or make them feel any better about themselves if they can process what you've said. So yeah, there's that piece around just linking in, checking the color, checking the strategy that will help them to regulate.
And I suppose what you don't want to do is say to everyone when they're in the red zone, calm down.
Yes.
Don't do that.
Yeah. And you see that quite a lot. You're all in the yellow zone, you need to be in the green zone, there's a lesson on. And it's sort of that, for me, is sort of missing the principles and the points of zones of regulation in terms of supporting the kids to start to self-identify, and what to put them into the yellow zone. There might be something in the environment that, like you were saying, the lesson might be particularly exciting, or they might be mucking around because the behavior management is, it's the main teacher's not in the classroom and there's a temp for the day or something like that. Like, the kids, kids are kids. They're going to be dysregulated for different reasons. So yeah, it's just checking in on kind of what might have created the dysregulation and identifying that change in arousal state and supporting the kids. And that would be the other piece. Sometimes they need the co-regulation. So I think we jump to self-regulation far too quickly. And our SEND kids are typically emotionally immature and they're not as developed as their same aged peers. So they're not necessarily able to self-regulate at the age that you might expect them to be able to. And they might be able to self-regulate when they're a little bit dysregulated, but when they're really dysregulated, they're probably not going to be able to self-regulate. So there's a piece around understanding whether or not co-regulation is required to support that child to calm down, or whether they can do it by themselves. And I do see a lot of kids, the main strategy kids learn is that they can breathe or do yoga. Like if I ask a group of kids in every school, I say, what can you do to calm down? I can breathe. But the thing is, when they're really dysregulated, they might not be able to breathe themselves or change their breathing themselves. So they might need an adult there with them actually breathing. And we talked about this in the arousal one, like actually breathing with them, not telling them to breathe, or give them a balloon to blow up, or give them some bubbles to blow on, but like give them a whistle, give them a recorder, give them something that's going to physically support them, rather than just standing there telling them that they need to breathe and calm down. Because it's not, as an adult, if you're really distressed, someone standing there telling you to calm down and breathe is not a helpful thing. Like we all know, like the minute I say it, everyone's like, oh yeah, you're right. But like, it's just the number of times I see it in various different places, and have seen for years. But it's just sort of reframing that piece when we're helping kids.
So when you have a child in that red zone, you really, really want low arousal around them. So that means the environment.
Yes.
And that also means the number of people.
Yes.
And their arousal levels.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
So if you have literally just kind of, it's all gone wrong and you've kind of broken up a fight, you've somehow got to really de-escalate that situation. So immediately you've got to kind of separate those children.
Yes.
Into places that they are happy with.
Yeah.
Not just sort of thing. And you've also got to get your arousal
lower
down.
Yeah.
And we talk about they'll sense it.
Yes.
So you've literally got to slow your talking down. You've got to try and relax your body kind of thing. They will sense it all. They will hear it, how you're speaking. That's that co-regulation. You're kind of supporting them to bring themselves down.
Yes.
Into being more regulated.
Yes.
And I think personally, you might say differently, but to me, stuff like bubbles won't work in the red zone.
No.
But probably work in that orange zone as more of a distraction. You're distracting that part of my head while the rest of it can come down. And that distraction bit for me is actually really powerful.
Yeah, particularly with young children, you can blow the bubbles and then they can try and blow them further or pop them. But yeah, it's another way to facilitate that kind of breathing. One thing as adults, and also when you're helping children, there's some evidence around if you breathe out for longer than you breathe in. So if you sort of breathe in for a count of 4 and then out for a count of 6 or 8, that helps to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the side of the nervous system that calms us down. So one way we can actively influence that is by changing our breathing and making the exhale longer than the inhale. And that's a really simple strategy, if you can remember it, that you can pull in. I've
only just got square breathing.
Well, to be fair, all you've got to do is get rectangle breathing, because you just imagine the short side is the in, the out is the long side is the out, the short side's the in, the long side's the out.
You don't hold it.
You don't have to hold it. Breathing. No, you just in.
Coming next week, hexagonal breathing.
Well, they actually have hexagonal breathing in the zones. There's an image.
Dodecahedron breathing. That's the biggest side shape I know, which I don't even know how many sides it got.
She's got in, hold out, which works as 6.
Technically, it could be a nonagon then.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, but there is a hexagon in the zones.
Nonagon?
I don't know, but there is a hexagon in the zones book.
So you got to remember, depending on the situation, whether you do square breathing or rectangular breathing.
But there is definitely evidence around making the exhale.
But it does make you. It is because it kind of you let things out, and I find you just your shoulders go down on that breathing down, and When you breathe in, they come up. So the longer they seem to fall further each time you breathe out.
Yes, because you're probably activating your diaphragm and no longer clavicular breathing. It's a new piece of terminology for you to learn.
I just wrote that down. Not.
Shoulder breathing.
Shoulder breathing.
Yeah.
I've only got two shoulders, no shapes involved.
We've slightly digressed.
We have.
Do you have any other questions about zones?
No, it's just what I'm trying to get my head clear is where it's going wrong in schools is often green is good, red is bad.
Yeah.
Focusing on the emotion, maybe not the feeling, or the thing which got them there.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes just an over-reliance on talking and cognitive strategies. So what I'm finding what I'm realizing in my PhD research is that self-regulation, when you talk to OTs, we very much view it from that level of alertness, neurological bottom-up perspective, because we view it from more of a sensory integration perspective a lot of the time. Whereas educators view it very much from a metacognitive executive function approach. So a lot of the time there's a lot of language and a lot of cognition used with supporting self-regulation. And I think that's one of the reasons that educators grab a lot of the emotion words and that kind of piece around the zones of regulation and focus less on that level of alertness piece, whereas OTs will focus more on the level of alertness piece and then sort of add in the language. So it's just kind of considering both of those sides, because the level of alertness is something that we don't have 100% control over. You know, our nervous system is fueling some of that. And particularly in the red zone, it does take a while to calm down. And also thinking about when kids are in the red zone, they don't really have good access to their cortex and their thinking and language centers of the brain. So we do need to use less language and give them time, more time than you think, for a lot of our kids to calm back down, because otherwise we're just triggering them back up into the red zone quite quickly.
About to say, thinking is if you're really in the red, it's really just time and calmness around you is what gets you back down. Yeah.
So the other thing I will mention is there was a recent systematic review on the zones of regulation. They called it a research review. So it was published in May 2023, and we are recording in October 2023, just because I'm mindful that things will change in the future. So I just want to put some dates onto that so that, things are going to change because there will be more research. But there is actually they say in the review, there's very little empirical evidence to show efficacy of zones of regulation, and that it is not an evidence-based practice. So there is, on the zones website, there are quite a lot of small studies that have been done by doctoral or master students. So there is that there, but there is very little peer-reviewed published literature on the zones. And I just want to highlight that because it's so ubiquitous at the moment and it's being used sort of everywhere. There's just, particularly looking at autism, there's very little evidence. There's very little published evidence for use with children, for autistic kids. And also there's two bigger studies that I've seen that were using it with the bigger groups of kids, and both of them found that it wasn't impactful when it had been used. So whilst there are a lot of doctoral and master studies showing some results, the most recent research review has said that it doesn't meet the standards for evidence-based practice, despite how much it's being used in schools.
Not saying it doesn't. It's not saying it's damaging. It's not saying it definitely doesn't work, but it's not saying it definitely does work. There's not enough evidence to say it does or doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think there's an assumption that there's a lot of evidence behind it just because it is very commonly used nowadays. But please don't assume that there is evidence there, because the most recent review has not found good evidence to support its use.
Could we not start at that beginning?
Oh, no, I wanted to run through because it is being used. And I think your summary around the fact that there's no evidence that it's causing harm.
Yeah.
But it's just, we don't have good peer-reviewed published research to say that it's definitely evidence-based.
But you could probably tie lots of theories that this is reflecting and showing and demonstrating in a really simple, easy to understand way. But I suppose the dangers are that although it perceives as quite simple because it's traffic lighted, there is still lots of nuances and complexities and layers within that. You've got to make sure you're kind of doing all of them for it to really work.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
And even though you might be doing all of it, it still might not work. But it probably will. But whether it was that zones of regulation or something else, but in my head, it's that as long as you stay away from green, good, red, bad, yellow, we've got to get back to green as quickly as possible.
Yes.
To it depends what we're doing.
Yes.
Red is generally always bad.
Well,
unless you're the Hulk.
Red is the state that you've ended up in because of circumstances, and it's a danger zone that we need to support you to stay safe in.
Yes.
I would still never call it bad.
No, I'm literally thinking is that completely full 100% dysregulated through whatever stimulus has happened, and in reality your body will want to get out of that quite quickly. Your body wants to be in the green, or as a general rule your body wants to be in the green. It's the safest place for your body, but sometimes yellow is needed.
Yes.
Sometimes blue is needed.
Yes. Sometimes red is appropriate. Sometimes it is appropriate to be completely...
Probably to the point as if sometimes in certain situations, if you don't go red, that's indicative of another problem.
Well, yeah, like sometimes it is appropriate to be completely terrified.
Yeah.
You know, if you were in Ukraine and your house was being bombed, it would be completely appropriate for you to be completely terrified and in the red zone.
Yes.
Or shut down and still be like exceptionally high red. So yeah, there are definitely situations where you circumstances would push you into that red zone.
Yes, and you shouldn't be sitting there going in the middle of the war zone, bombs going, be green!
No.
Be green!
No.
That would be the point where you literally just hold hands and wait.
Yeah.
Type of thing. And hopefully it will come out and you'll come down to the yellow and then back to green. Have we done it? Have we covered it all?
I think that's a good summary. Yeah. And the other thing I would say is definitely if you are using zones, have a read through the first parts of the book, have a bit of a skim through the lesson plans so you've got an idea of the concepts. And there is more formal training that you can attend. I'm pretty sure they've got online training now. But it is useful to have that background understanding of the tool you're using. And I would say that for absolutely every tool that you're sort of being asked to use in schools is that you do want to have training and understanding of the background of it. And I know that that's not always possible in schools, but I would really hope that we can move to a place where we are providing that education and that mentoring and that support for using the tools that we're using.
To me, I like to understand what I'm doing. I don't just take something off the shelf and dive in.
Yeah.
I like to know, why is it doing it this way? What's it doing it this way? And I know teachers, you really are short for time. I get that. And to me, that's maybe more of a reason, because you want to be making sure that before I put all my time and effort into this, I really understand it and have that belief in it and know it's going to work, rather than taking it on and then realizing 6 months later, well, this isn't working. To me, although it takes more effort, it hopefully means you really understand what you're going to take on.
Yes.
And you're really then invested because you've done that research and you're really invested and you really put that effort in.
Yeah. And I suppose there's a piece around if schools are using it, making sure that they're putting that into their CPD time. So it's not an extra thing teachers have got to do, but that it is a thing that has been covered in existing CPD time, if that's something that the school's rolling out and using, and kind of reflecting back around on it at least every other year, but ideally every year to make sure it's working. Because our children, the needs of our kids are changing, like, and each cohort that comes through is not the same every year. So it sort of doesn't need to be adapted. Do we need to use simpler language? Do we need to, when I was in all of the autism units I've worked in, we've always dropped down to like one color for the first, for the reception kids coming in, we only have one emotion per color. We don't use all the emotions. And then we go to 3 emotions per color, and then we go to 6. So we change it depending on the needs of the child. So there will always be tweaks that are sort of needed for the different cohorts of what's coming in.
Nice. So I'm going to put a link to the book in the show notes and also all of others, Kim's contact details, so you can get hold of Kim and find out more from Kim. I'm going to keep saying Kim. And as always, you'll find the show notes on the website and also where you listen to the podcast. And don't forget, you can follow us on social media, on Facebook, The Zencast, on Instagram, The Zencast, and the artist formerly known as Twitter, The Zencast. And if you're looking for a simple, secure way to capture and share evidence of learning, or you need a way to capture people's voice, a way to celebrate and share people's achievements, or a simple way to communicate with parents that is nice and safe, you need to have a look at Eversense. Eversense is our evidence system that does so much more to help boost parental engagement. To find out more about Eversense, visit the B Squared website, where you can also find out about our online training, our CPD, watch our webinars, read our blog, lots and lots of things. And you will find a link to the website and to book a meeting with me in the show notes. So thank you for listening. We will be back next week with another episode of The Zencast. It's goodbye from Kim.
And goodbye from Dale.
Actually, I'd mix it up there. Bye, everyone.
Bye.